It's your bear here, and I want to talk about Forspoken. In an industry overrun by sequels, spin-offs, and reboots, Square Enix has the courage to release a brand new IP that just feels like a sequel to Final Fantasy XV. Right away, I want to say that this game is for people who really like open-world exploration, grand magical battles, and resource gathering. The combat is awesome, polished, and really just a lot of fun to play. I really like this game. However, Forspoken has more than its fair share of problems. I'll be touching on both the good and the bad with this game. I've been playing this on a PlayStation 5, so this review focuses on the experience of PlayStation. I've heard of larger issues with the PC version, but I cannot speak to any of those directly. If you plan on buying the PC version, do your research and make sure that your machine meets the basic requirements. And obviously, there will be some minor spoilers ahead as well. The core gameplay is so much fun, but like I said, there are problems. You can tell that this game is running on the Luminous engine, the same game engine that brought us Final Fantasy XV. It has a lot of the same ups and downs in gameplay as that previous game did. While it is a blast to play, some of the core mechanics cause some pretty annoying breaks to the flow of gameplay. I'll talk about some of the negatives and how the game plays first before talking about what works really well. The biggest thing that really breaks the mood for me is the constant pausing for small cutscenes and NPC interactions. These moments absolutely destroy the flow of the game. For a title that focuses so much on fast-paced action and fluid movement, the constant pausing and fading to black just to talk to an NPC is really jarring. There are so many conversations and side stories that just lock you in place and fade to black, and it often isn't worth it, as many of the side quests are just utterly pointless. A lot of the dialogue in the game is just plagued with these prolonged pauses. Sometimes you can advance the dialogue through the pauses, but other times the game seems to force some clock or animation in the background to catch up, which could result in you just having to sit through dead air for 5 seconds per sentence. To me, this definitely feels like it's the fault of the FF15 engine. I remember some of the conversations feeling so stilted and unnatural in that game, but somehow Forspoken has made them worse. All of these not-so-subtle pauses really took me out of the moment while playing the game. Another kind of obvious issue to mention is that this is a Square Enix game, so the first 2 chapters are all tutorial all the time. The tutorials are painfully slow and filled with constant pop-ups that highlight additional reading. This is a really bad start to an otherwise great game. The first 2 chapters are where most of the tutorial is at, but you do get some later on as they add new mechanics. Once you get past that and out of the first major city, the game actually opens up and kind of feels like it finally begins, in my opinion. Once it finally begins, this game really starts to shine. The traversing of the open world, the exploration, the combat, they're all so much fun. You can tell this is where the developers focused a lot of their effort and energy when making this game. The gameplay is just fun. I never got tired of the combat, and I would find myself going out of my way to pick another fight. This is an RPG, so I was expecting some level of grinding, but I never once felt like I was grinding. There's a fair amount of enemy variety, underground dungeons, mini-bosses, exploration puzzles, and just open world to explore, that it kept me running around all day. I would sometimes have to force myself back to the main storyline because I had run off down some path of exploration or discovery and ended up in some far-reaching corner of the world. And the load times for this game are insane. They are just so fast. Almost as soon as you press continue, you were playing the game. The fast travel loading screen is literally faster than backing out of the fast travel menu. I have never seen a PS5 game load this fast. It is a new experience altogether. I really enjoyed playing Forspoken, but the constant pauses and pop-ups were quite annoying. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, there are lots of pros and cons here too. I think the developers overpromised on the graphics side. Square Enix was vowing that Forspoken was going to be the most beautiful open world game to date. There are times when it looks quite good, but there are also times when it looks like Final Fantasy XV, which was released for the PlayStation 4 more than 6 years ago. So all in all, it looks pretty dated. Another area that didn't wow me was the motion capture. Their mocap definitely has some issues. I would find myself staring at some NPC with their mouth agape and their eyes bulging out of their skull. It is sad when you look at other major releases like Horizon Forbidden West, which had such amazing facial animations. Forspoken really just looks like an older game in that respect. And also, some of the movement animations for Frey, like the ones for sprinting or ladder climbing, they just look off to me. Something about them looks a tad bit ridiculous. But the animations for the parkour, those were spot on in my opinion. A few other issues that you'll probably notice right away are texture pop-in and flickering. It starts in literally the opening cutscene for me and continues all the way to the very end. It isn't game-breaking, but it is noticeable and can sometimes pull you out of the moment. That said, there are some really amazing moments in Forspoken. Some of the set pieces are gorgeous, and the player can create some of the most amazing mid-fight spectacles that I've ever seen in a game. Once you get the hang of the combat and getting some of your upgraded spells, Forspoken is truly an experience. Personally, I don't understand some people's claims that the overworld is empty or barren. I found it full of both enemies to fight and beautiful scenery to explore. And then there's just the overall vibe of the world. Parts of it just elicit this feeling that I got when playing Breath of the Wild. There are some moments of untold stories laid out about the world. Little bits of lore for the player to discover that begs your imagination to piece together what might have happened. I really liked exploring and playing detective as I stumbled across these frozen little moments in time throughout the overworld. Overall, the graphics aren't going to win it Game of the Year, but the battles alone make this one of the best looking games in the past 5 years, at least in my opinion. As for the controls, Frey isn't the most precise character in all of gaming, but in a way it feels realistic. I would sometimes find myself overjumping or continuing to move after a particularly difficult landing, but that makes sense for a person who just triple jumped up a cliff to land on a narrow brick wall. Maybe she doesn't stick the landing every single time. After giving myself some time to become accustomed to the controls, I was trying out different combinations in the settings that made the combat and the climbing just flow and work so much better for me. I feel like I have a good understanding of the movement mechanics now. The game does not subscribe to your standardized controller mapping, and that's fine. Veteran gamers are going to feel like they're fighting it or having a kind of frustrating experience when trying to use the default controls. But you don't have to fight it, you can just customize it. I'll talk a bit more about the customization options in the accessibility section, but the ability to customize all of the buttons in this game are very welcome. There are a lot to the controls, and having to play only one way would have been quite limiting. Another positive are the controller haptics. For example, when exploring the map, you might get an audible clue that a new point of interest is nearby, but if you miss that cue, the controller also lets you know. You can actually find the direction and proximity of certain locations through the pulsating of the controller. When you're near a magical font, for example, the controller vibrates like a heartbeat, which you can feel in different parts of your hands depending on the direction of the pond from where the player's standing. These are just really nice touches to a game with an already spectacular control set. The story in Forspoken is fine. It's not going to win any awards, and it's kind of short for a AAA game, but overall it's okay. Many of the twists are choreographed well in advance, and the main character's motivations are somewhat questionable at times. But the game does a good job of spacing out the main story between grand magical parkour fights and open world exploration, so it can be easy to forget how straightforward the story actually is. Aside from the main story, there are these moments when the relationships between the two main characters really just steal the show for me. Some of the exchanges between Frey and Cuff are just so entertaining. It has this slightly masochistic sibling rivalry type energy that comes across like the wholesome parts of Venom and Eddie Brock.
Destruction and corruption are forms of creation in themselves.
Wow, you sound like a serial killer.
What?
destruction and corruption are beautiful forms of creation in themselves.
I don't sound like that.
You absolutely sound like that.
I know you absolutely sound like that. Yeah, see? Two compare that game.
You're fucking stupid.
There are moments like that in the game where Cuff really reminds me of Grimoire Weiss from Nier. He has this dry, condescending wit which permeates the game. But unlike Nier, Frey doesn't back down at all. She's a badass, and they establish her as quite a strong lead right away. She doesn't give an inch to anyone, especially to Cuff. There are some bits of the conversation which you hear quite a bit when running around the overworld, but you can tweak how often those are triggered in the settings. And none of that banter triggers any of the pauses like when you have dialogue with the NPCs, so at the end I didn't really mind it. Speaking of tweaking the settings, Sony is making a lot of developers really push for accessibility lately, and I'm so loving it. Forspoken allows you to customize the difficulty, the controls, and the gameplay in ways that just weren't possible a few years ago. Forspoken has a unique combat style to say the least, and the flexibility allowed in the accessibility options really helps to ensure that this game is playable by a majority of people. For me, being able to remove the time slowdown effect when changing between spells really improved my experience. I also found that turning spell switching option to hold instead of toggle completely removed any of the pauses for combat for me. You can deeply customize the button mapping if you want, and make the game control more like a traditional exploration or combat game if you like. As is normal in RPG, there are default difficulty levels, but the game allows you to further customize the difficulty beyond that too. There are settings for auto evasion, auto healing, stamina regeneration, damage mitigation, etc. So this game can be as easy or as difficult as you want it to be. And another thing that I love is that you can save just about anywhere. I am so sick of modern games not allowing the player to save in the overworld or at times when nothing's going on. Sometimes I just can't play for 2 or 3 hours straight, so the ability to save whenever I need to is an extremely welcome feature. Forspoken is far from perfect. There are a lot of issues that I feel are just core problems with the game's Luminous engine. But that said, I absolutely loved playing this game. I'm going to go back and platinum this game over the next several days. Writing, recording, and editing this review is bittersweet time spent not playing Forspoken. Overall, I score this game a 4.5 out of 5. It's a solid game, and I don't care what anyone else has to say. Should you play Forspoken? Hopefully, if you've watched all the way to here, you have a better idea if this is a game that you'll like or not. Let me know in the comments if you plan on playing, or if you've already played the game and what you thought about it. And as always, thank you for watching.